Jean Giraud. Jean Henri Gaston Giraud, French, ʒiʁo, 8 May 1938 – 10 March 2012, was a French artist, cartoonist, and writer who worked in the Franco-Belgian bands dessinées BD tradition. Giraud garnered worldwide acclaim under the pseudonym Mœbius, French mø.bjys, as well as French ʒiʁo are outside the English-speaking world, used for the Blueberry series, his most successful creation in the non-English speaking parts of the world, and his Western-themed paintings. Esteemed by Federico Fellini, Stan Lee, and Hayao Miyazaki, among others, he has been described as the most influential bande dessinée artist after Hergé. His most famous works include the series Blueberry, created with writer Jean-Michel Charlier, featuring one of the first antiheroes in Western comics. As Mœbius, he created a wide range of science fiction and fantasy comics in a highly imaginative, surreal, almost abstract style. These works include Arzach and the Airtight Garage of Cornelius. He also collaborated with avant-garde filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky for an unproduced adaptation of Dune and the comic book series The Incal. Mœbius also contributed storyboards and concept designs to numerous science fiction and fantasy films such as Alien, Tron, The Fifth Element, and The Abyss. Blueberry was adapted for the screen in 2004 by French director Jean Kounen. Early life. Jean Giraud was born in Nogent-sur-Marne, Val-de-Marne, in the suburbs of Paris, on 8 May 1938, as the only child to Raymond Giraud, an insurance agent, and Pauline Vinchon, who had worked at the agency. When he was 3 years old, his parents divorced, and he was raised mainly by his grandparents, who were living in the neighboring municipality of Fontenay-sous-Bois. Much later, when he was an acclaimed artist, Giraud returned to live in the municipality in the mid-1970s, but was unable to buy his grandparents' house. The rupture between mother and father created a lasting trauma that he explained lay at the heart of his choice of separate pen names. An introverted child at first, young Giraud found solace after World War II in a small theater, playing an abundance of American B-movie westerns. Giraud, frequenting the theater there as often as he was able to, developed a passion for the genre, as did so many other European boys his age in those times. At age 9-10, Giraud started to draw Western comics while enrolled by his single mother as a stopgap measure in the St. Nicholas boarding school in Issy-les-Moulineaux for 2 years, and where he became acquainted with Belgian comic magazines. In 1954, at age 16, he began his only technical training at the École supérieure des arts appliquées du Paris, where he started producing Western comics, though these did not sit well with his conservative teachers. At the college, he befriended other future comic artists Jean-Claude Mézières and Pat Mallet. With Mézières in particular, in no small part due to their shared passion for science fiction, westerns, and the Far West, Giraud developed a close, lifelong friendship, calling him life's continuing adventure in later life. In 1956, he left art school without graduating to visit his mother, who had married a Mexican in Mexico, and stayed there for 9 months. The experience of the Mexican desert, in particular its endless blue skies and unending flat plains, now seeing and experiencing for himself the vistas that had enthralled him so much when watching westerns on the silver screen only a few years earlier, left an everlasting chose quiem littéralement acclaim, enduring impression on him, easily recognized. After his return to France, he started to work as a full-time tenured artist for Catholic publisher Fleuris Press, to whom he was introduced by Mézières, who had shortly before found employment at the publisher. In 1959-1960, he was slated for military service in firstly the French occupation zone of Germany, and subsequently Algeria, in the throes of the vicious Algerian War at the time. Fortunately for him, however, he somehow managed to escape frontline duty, as he, being the only serviceman available at the time with a graphics background, served out his military obligations, being set to work as illustrator on the Army magazine ʒiʁo, besides being assigned to logistic duties. Algeria was Giraud's second acquaintance with other, more exotic cultures, and like he did in Mexico, he soaked in the experience, which made another indelible impression on the young man born as a suburban city boy, leaving its traces in his later comics, especially those created as Mœbius. Career, Western comics. At 18, Giraud was drawing his own humorous, Maurice-inspired, Western comic two-page shorts, Frank et Jeremy, for the magazine Far West, his first freelance commercial sales. Magazine editor Arzach thought young Giraud was gifted with a knack for humorous comics, but none whatsoever for realistically drawn comics, and advised him to continue in the vein of Frank et Jeremy. Fleuris, 1956–1958. Tenured at publisher Fleuris from 1956 to 1958 after his first sales, Giraud did so, but concurrently continued to steadfastly create realistically drawn Western comics alongside several others of a French historical nature and illustrations for magazine editorials in their magazines for Pounded et Mare. Among his realistic Westerns was a comic called Le Roi des Bisons, King of the Buffalo, has had an English publication, and another called Un Géant chez les Hurons, a giant with the Hurons. Actually, several of his Western comics, including King of the Buffalo, featured the same protagonist, Art Howell, and these can be considered as Giraud's de facto first realistic Western series, as he himself did in effect, since he, save the first one, endowed these stories with the subtitle An Adventure d'Art Howell. For Fleuris, Giraud also illustrated his first 3 books. Already in this period, his style was heavily influenced by his later mentor, Belgian comic artist Joseph Giraud Gulain, who at that time was the major source of inspiration for an entire generation of young, aspiring French comic artists, including Giraud's friend Mézières, interested in doing realistically drawn comics. How major Giraud's influence was on these young artists was amply demonstrated by the Fleuris publications these youngsters submitted their work to, as their work strongly resembled each other. For example, 2 of the books Giraud illustrated for Fleuris were co-illustrated with Guy Malmenu, another name of some future renown in the Franco-Belgian comic world, and Giraud's work can only be identified because he signed his work, whereas Malmenu did not sign his. While not ample, Giraud's earnings at Fleuris were just enough to allow him disenchanted. Giraud apprenticeship 1961–1962. Shortly before he entered military service, Giraud visited his idol at his home for the first time with Mézières and Mallet, followed by a few visits on his own to see the master at work for himself. In 1961, returning from military service and his stint on 5/5 Forces Francaises, Giraud, not wanting to return to Fleuris, as he felt that he had to do something else if he ever wanted to evolve, became an apprentice of Giraud on his invitation, after he saw that Giraud had made artistic progress during his stay at 5. Giraud was then one of the leading comic artists in Europe and known for his gracious tendency to voluntarily act as a mentor for young, aspiring comic artists, of whom Giraud was only one, going even as far as opening up his family home in Champressay for days on end for these youngsters, which again included Giraud. In this, Giraud resembled Belgian comic grandmaster Hergé, but unlike Giraud, Hergé only did so on a purely commercial basis, never on a voluntarily one. For Giraud, Giraud created several other shorts and illustrations for the short-lived magazine Bonux Boy 1960/61, his first comic work after military service, and his penultimate one before embarking on Blueberry. In this period, Giraud used his apprentice for the inks on an outing of his Western series Jerry Spring, after whom Giraud had, unsurprisingly, modeled his Art Howell character previously, The Road to Coronado, which Giraud inked. Actually, Ʒiʁo had intended his promising pupil for the entirety of the story arc, but the still inexperienced Giraud, who was used to working under the relaxed conditions at Fleuris, found himself overwhelmed by the strict time schedules that production for a periodical ʒiʁo in this case demanded. Conceding that he had been a bit too cocky and ambitious, Giraud stated, "I started the story all by myself, but after a week I had only finished half a plate, and aside from being soaked with my sweat, it was a complete disaster. So Joseph went on to do the penciling, whereas I did the ink." Even though Giraud did lose touch with his mentor eventually, he never forgot what his master had provided him with, both aesthetically and professionally, the fatherless Giraud gratefully stating in later life. Hachette 1962–1963. After his stint at Ʒiʁo, Giraud was again approached by friend Mœbius to see if he was interested to work alongside him as an illustrator on Hachette's ambitious multi-volume L'Histoire des Civilisations history reference work. Spurred on by Ʒiʁo, who considered the opportunity a wonderful one for his pupil, Giraud accepted. Though he considered the assignment a daunting one, having to create in oil paints from historical objects and imagery, it was, besides being the best-paying job he had ever had, a seminal appointment. At Hachette, Giraud discovered that he had a knack for creating art in gouaches, something that served him well not that much later when creating Blueberry magazine/album cover art, as well as for his 1968 side project Buffalo Bill, Le Roi des Éclaireurs history book written by George Franvel, for whom Giraud provided 2/3 of the illustrations in gouache. The assignment at Hachette being cut short because of his invitation to embark on Fort Navajo meant he only participated on the first 3 to 4 volumes of the book series, leaving the completion to Mœbius. In the pilot era, Giraud additionally provided art in gouache for 2 Western-themed vinyl record music productions as sleeve art, as well as the covers for the first 7 outings in the French-language edition of the Morgan Cain Western novel series written by Louis Masterson. Much of his Western-themed gouache artwork of this era, including that of Blueberry, has been collected in the 1983 art book Le Tireur Solitaire. Aside from its professional importance, Giraud's stint at Hachette was also of personal importance, as he met Claudine Kinnin, an editorial researcher at Hachette, and who described her future husband as being at the time funny, uncomplicated, friendly, a nice boy next door, but on the other hand mysterious, dark, intellectual, already married in 1967. After Giraud had become the recognized Blueberry artist, the couple had 2 children, Helene B. 1970 and Julian B. 1972. Daughter Helene in particular has inherited her father's graphics talents and has carved out a career as a graphics artist in the animation industry, earning her a 2014 French civilian knighthood, the same her father had already received in 1985. Besides raising their children, wife Claudine not only took care of the business aspects of her husband's artwork, but has on occasion also contributed to it as colorist. The 1976 feminist fantasy short story, La Tarte aux Pommes, was written by her under her maiden name. Additionally, the appearance of a later major character in Giraud's Blueberry series, Chihuahua Pearl, was in part based on Claudine's looks. The Mœbiusian 1973 fantasy road trip, pilot 1963–1974. In October 1963, Giraud and writer Jean-Michel Charlier started the comic strip Fort Navajo for the Charlier co-founded Pilot magazine, issue 210. At this time, the affinity between the styles of Giraud and Ʒiʁo, who in effect had been Charlier's first choice for the series, but who was reverted to Giraud by Ʒiʁo, was so close that Ʒiʁo penciled several pages for the series when Giraud went AWOL. In effect, when Fort Navajo started its run, Pilot received angry letters accusing Giraud of plagiarism, which was however foreseen by Ʒiʁo and Giraud. Shirking off the accusations, Ʒiʁo encouraged his former pupil to stay the course instead, thereby propping up his self-confidence. The first time ʒiʁo had to fill in for Giraud was during the production of the second story, Thunder in the West 1964, when the still inexperienced Giraud, buckling under the stress of having to produce a strictly scheduled magazine serial, suffered from a nervous breakdown, with ʒiʁo taking on plates 2836. The second time occurred 1 year later, during the production of Mission to Mexico: The Lost Rider, when Giraud unexpectedly packed up and left to travel the United States and, again, Mexico. Yet again former mentor ʒiʁo came to the rescue by penciling plates 1738. While the art style of both artists had been nearly indistinguishable from each other in Thunder in the West, after Giraud resumed work on plate 39 of Mission to Mexico, a clearly noticeable style breach was now observable, indicating that Giraud was now well on his way to develop his own signature style, eventually surpassing that of his former teacher ʒiʁo, who impressed. The Lieutenant Blueberry character, whose facial features were based on those of the actor Jean-Paul Belmondo, was created in 1963 by Charlier's scenario and Giraud drawings for Pilot. While the Fort Navajo series had originally been intended as an ensemble narrative, it quickly gravitated towards having Blueberry as its central figure. His featured adventures, in what was later called the Blueberry series, may be Giraud's best-known work in native France and the rest of Europe, before later collaborations with Alejandro Jodorowsky. The early Blueberry comics used a simple line drawing style similar to that of ʒiʁo, and standard Western themes and imagery, specifically those of John Ford's U.S. Cavalry Western trilogy, with Howard Hawks' 1959 Rio Bravo thrown in for good measure for the sixth one-shot titled The Man with the Silver Star, but gradually Giraud developed a. With the fifth album, The Trail of the Navajos, Giraud established his own style, and after both editorial control and censorship laws were loosened in the wake of the May 1968 social upheaval in France, the former in no small part due to the revolt comic artists, Giraud chief among them, staged a short time thereafter in the editorial offices of Dargaud. The first Blueberry album penciled by Giraud after he had begun publishing science fiction as Mœbius, Nesquest's Broken Nose, was much more experimental than his previous Western work. While the editorial revolt at Dargaud had effectively become the starting point of the emancipation of the French comic world, Giraud admitted that it also had caused a severe breach in his hitherto warm relationship with the conservative Goscinny, which never fully mended. Giraud left the series and publisher in 1974, partly because he was tired of the publication pressure he was under in order to produce the series, partly because of an emerging royalties conflict, but mostly because he wanted further explore and develop his Mœbius alter ego, in particular because Jodorowsky, who was impressed by the graphic qualities of Blue. Giraud was so eager to return to the project during a stopover from the United States while the project was in hiatus that he greatly accelerated the work on the angel face outing of Blueberry he was working on at the time, shearing off weeks from its originally intended completion. The project fell through, though, and after he had returned definitely to France later that year, he started to produce comic work under this pseudonym that was published in the magazine he co-founded, Metal Hurlant, which started its run in December 1974 and revolutionized the Franco-Belgian comic world in the process. It was Jodorowsky who introduced Giraud to the writings of Carlos Castaneda, who had written a series of books that describe his training in shamanism, particularly with a group whose lineage descended from the Toltecs. The books, narrated in the first person, related his experiences under the tutelage of a Yaqui man of knowledge named Don Juan Matus. Castaneda's writings made a deep and everlasting impression on Giraud, already open to native Mexican folk culture due to his 3 previous extended trips to the country. He had visited the country a third time in 1972, and it did influence his art as Mœbius, particularly in regard to dream sequences, though he was not quite able to work in such influence. Yet, unbeknownst to writer Charlier, he did already sneak in some Castaneda elements in Castaneda's influence reasserted itself in full in Giraud's later life, having worked in elements more openly after Charlier's death in his 1999 Blueberry outing Geronimo Alapish, and was to become a major element for his Blueberry 1900 project, which, however, had refused to come to fruition for extraneous reasons. Even though Giraud had vainly tried to introduce his Blueberry co-worker to the writings of Castaneda, Charlier, being of a previous generation, conservative in nature and wary of science fiction in general, never understood what his younger colleague tried to achieve as Mœbius. Nonetheless, he never tried to hinder Giraud in the least, as he understood that an artist of Giraud's caliber needed a mental shower from time to time. Furthermore, Charlier was very appreciative of the graphic innovations Giraud ported over from his work as Mœbius into the mainstream Blueberry series, most specifically Nescas, making him one of the all-time greatest artists in the comic medium, as Charlier himself put it in 1982. Artist Michel Rouge, who was taken on by Giraud in 1980 for the inks of La Longue Marche, The Long March painted a slightly different picture though. Already recognizing that the two men were living in different worlds, he noted that Charlier was not pleased with Giraud taking on an assistant, afraid that it might have been a prelude to his leaving the series in order to pursue his experimentations as Mœbius further. While Charlier was willing to overlook Giraud's philandering in his case only, he was otherwise of the firm conviction that artists, especially his own, should totally and wholeheartedly devote themselves to their craft, as Charlier had always considered the medium. Even Giraud was in later life led to believe that Charlier apparently detested his other work, looking upon it as something akin to treason, though his personal experiences with the author was that he had kept an open mind in this regard, at least in his case. According to Giraud, Charlier's purported stance negatively influenced his son Philip, causing their relationship to rapidly deteriorate into open animosity after the death of his father. Post-Pilot 1979–2007, Giraud returned to the Blueberry series in 1979, with Nescas as a freelancer. Later that year, however, the long-running disagreement Charlier and Giraud had with their publishing house Dargaud, the publisher of Pilot, over the residuals from Blueberry came to a head. They began the Western comic Jim Cutlass as a means to put the pressure on Dargaud. It did not work, and Charlier and Giraud turned their back on the parent publisher definitively, leaving for greener pastures elsewhere, and in the process taking all of Charlier's co-creations with them. It would be nearly 15 years before the Blueberry series returned to Dargaud after Charlier died. For further particulars, including the royalties conflict, see Blueberry publication history. After the first album Mississippi River, first serialized in Metal Hurlant, and for 2 decades remaining a one-shot, Giraud took on scripting the revitalized series after Charlier had died, while leaving the artwork to Christian Rossi. When Charlier, Giraud's collaborator on Blueberry, died in 1989, Giraud assumed responsibility for the scripting of the main series, the last outing of which, Apaches, released in 2007, became the last title Giraud created for the parent publisher. Blueberry has been translated into 19 languages, the first English book translations being published in 1977/78 by UK publisher Egmont/Methuen, though its publication was cut short after only 4 volumes. The original Blueberry series has spun off a prequel series called Young Blueberry in the Pilot era 1968–1970, but the artwork was in 1984 when that series was resurrected, left to Colin Wilson and later Mitchell Blanc Dumont after the first 3 original volumes in that series, as well as the Giraud written, but all these series except Jim Cutlass had returned to the parent publisher Dargaud in late 1993, though Giraud himself having already left the employ of the publisher in 1974. See below, had not, instead plying his trade as a freelancer, explaining the Jim Cutlass exception. While Giraud has garnered universal praise and acclaim for his work as Mœbius, especially in the US, the UK, and Japan, as Blueberry has always remained his most successful, and most recognized work in native France itself and in mainland Europe, despite its artist developing somewhat of a love/hate relationship with his co-creation in later life, which was that Blueberry has always remained his primary source of income, allowing him to fully indulge in his artistic endeavors as Mœbius, was admitted as such by Giraud as early as 1979. If an album of Mœbius is released, about 10,000 people are interested. A Blueberry album sells at least 100,000 copies in France. Science fiction and fantasy comics. The Mœbius pseudonym, which Giraud came to use for his science fiction and fantasy work, was born in 1963 while he was working on the Hachette project, as he did not like to work on paintings alone all day, and like an alcoholic needing his alcohol had to create comics. In a satire magazine called Harakiri, Giraud used the name for 21 strips in 1963-64, much of which collected in Epic's Mœbius 1/2, see below. Though Giraud enjoyed the artistic freedom and atmosphere at the magazine greatly, he eventually gave up his work there as Blueberry, on which he had embarked in the meantime, demanded too much of his energy, aside from being a better paid job. Magazine editor-in-chief Cavanaugh was loath to let Giraud go, not understanding why Giraud would want to waste his talents on a kiddie comic. Subsequently, the pseudonym went unused for a decade, that is for comics at least, as Giraud continued its use for side projects as illustrator. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, Giraud provided interior front and back flyleaf illustrations as Mœbius for several outings in the science fiction book club series Club du Livre d'Anticipation, a limited edition hardcover series, collecting work from seminal science fiction writers, from French publisher Editions Optin. Additionally, this period in time also saw 4 vinyl record music productions endowed with Mœbius sleeve art. Much of this illustration art has been reproduced in Giraud's first art book as Mœbius, aptly entitled Mœbius, released in 1980. There actually had also been a personal reason as well for Giraud to suspend his career as Mœbius comic artist. After he had returned from his second trip from Mexico, he found himself confronted with the artist's version of a writer's block as far as Mœbius comics were concerned, partly because Blueberry consumed all his energy. "For 8 months I tried, but I could not do it, so I quit," stated Giraud additionally. Giraud's statement notwithstanding, though, he did a couple of Harakiri-esque satirical comic shorts for Pilot in the early 1970s, but under the pseudonym Gur, most of which reprinted in the comic book Gur Œuvres Tome 1, Le Lac des Emeraudes, also collecting shorts he had created for the Fleuris magazines, Bonux Boy, and the Late Minus 1000. Elico des Savines, 1974. In 1974, he truly revived the Mœbius pseudonym for comics, and the very first 12-page story he created as such while on one of his stopovers from America when the Dune production was in a lull was Caucamer Blanc White Nightmare, published in the magazine Elico des Savines, issue 8, 1974. The black and white story dealt with the racist murder of an immigrant of North African descent, and stands out as one of the very few emphatic socially engaged works of Giraud. Bearing in mind Giraud's fascination with the Western genre in general and the cultural aspects of Native Americans in particular, and whose plight Giraud had always been sympathetic to, it is hardly a surprise that 2 later these concerned the 2-page short story Wounded Knee, inspired by the eponymous 1973 incident staged by Oglala Lakota, and the 3-page short story Discours du Chef Seattle, first published in the art book Made in L.A. The Words of Chief Seattle in Epic's Ballad for a Coffin. Giraud suddenly bursting out onto the comic scene as Mœbius caught European readership by surprise, and it took many of them, especially outside France, a couple of years before the realization had sunk in that Jean Giraud and Mœbius were, physically at least, one and the same artist. It was when he was brainstorming with the founding editors of the magazine founded by former Pilot friends and co-artists in the wake of the revolt at the publisher, when they decided to strike out on their own, that Giraud came up with his first major Mœbius work, Le Bandard Fool, the Horny Goof. Released directly as album, a first for Mœbius comics in black and white by the magazine's publisher, the humorous and satirical story dealt with a law-abiding citizen of the planet Soldai who awakens one day only to find himself with a permanent erection. Pursued through space and time by his own puritanical authorities, who frown upon the condition, and other parties who have their own intentions with the hapless Bandard, he eventually finds a safe haven on the asteroid floor of Madame Kowalski after several hilarious adventures. When discounting the Esger-signed La deviation, it is in this story that Giraud's signature minute Mœbius art style, for which he became famed not that much later, truly comes into its own. Another novelty introduced in the book is that the narrative is only related on the right-hand pages. The left-hand pages are taken up by one-page panels depicting an entirely unrelated cinematographic sequence of a man transforming after he has snapped his fingers. The story did raise some eyebrows, with critics accusing Giraud of pornography at the time, but one reviewer put it in perspective when stating, "Put etter porno, mais graphique," which loosely translates as porn maybe, but graphic art for sure. In the editorial of the 1990 American edition, Giraud has conceded that he was envious of what his former pilot colleagues had achieved with Ellico des Savanes in regard to creating a free, creative environment for their artists he had already enjoyed so much back at Harakiri, and that it was an inspiration for the endeavor Giraud embarked upon next. Metal Hurlant 1974–1982. Later that year, after Dune was permanently cancelled with him definitively returning to France, Giraud became one of the founding members of the comics art group and publishing house Les Humanoids Assassins, together with fellow comic artists Jean-Pierre Dionnet, Philip Drouillet, likewise pilot colleagues, and outsider financial director Bernard Farkas. In imitation of the example set by the Ellico des Savanes founding editors, it was therefore as such also an indirect result of the revolt these artists had previously staged at Pilot, and whose employ they had left for the undertaking. Together they started the monthly magazine Metal Hurlant, screaming metal in December 1974, and for which he had temporarily abandoned his Blueberry series. The translated version was known in the English-speaking world as Heavy Metal, and started its release in April 1977, actually introducing Giraud's work to North American readership. Mœbius' famous serial The Airtight Garage and his groundbreaking Arzach both began in Metal Hurlant. Unlike Harakiri and Ellico des Savanes, though, whose appeal has always remained somewhat limited to the socially engaged satire and underground comic scenes, it was Metal Hurlant in particular that revolutionized the world of Franco-Belgian bands dessinées, whereas its American cousin left an indelible impression on a generation of not only American comic artists. Starting its publication in the first issue of Metal Hurlant, Arzach is a wordless 1974–1975 comic, executed directly in color and created as a conscious attempt to breathe new life into the comic genre, which at the time was dominated by American superhero comics in the United States and by the traditional, adolescent-oriented band. It tracks the journey of the title character, flying on the back of his pterodactyl through a fantastic world, mixing medieval fantasy with futurism. Unlike most science fiction comics, it is, save for the artfully executed story titles entirely devoid of captions, speech balloons, and written sound effects. It has been argued that the wordlessness provides the strip with a sense of timelessness, setting up Arzaki's journey as a quest for eternal, universal truths. The short stories Esteemed, bande, Is Man Good, in issue 10, 1976, after the first publication in Pilot, issue 744, 1974, which however woke Giraud up to the unbearable realization that he was enriching the publisher with his Mœbius work, thereby expediting his departure. Ballad the Ballade 1976 saw the Metal Hurlant, issue 7/8, publication of The Long Tomorrow, written by Dan O'Bannon in 1974 during lulls in the pre-production of Jodorowsky's Dune. His series The Airtight Garage, starting its magazine run in issue 6, 1976, is particularly notable for its nonlinear plot, where movement and temporality can be traced in multiple directions depending on the reader's own interpretation, even within a single planche page or picture. The series tells of Major Grubert, who is constructing his own multi-level universe on an asteroid named Fleur from the Bandard Fool universe incidentally, and the first known instance of the artist's attempts of tying all his Mœbius creations into one coherent airtight garage universe, where he encounters a wealth of fantastic characters including Michael Moorcock's creation Jerry. The dark, disturbing and surreal tale dealt with a blind boy in a nondescript empty cityscape, who has his pet eagle scout for eyes, which it finds by taking these from a street cat and offering them to his awaiting companion who, while grateful, expresses his preference for the eyes of a child. The story premise originated from a brainstorming session Alejandro Jodorowsky had with his fellows of the Académie Panique, a group concentrated on chaotic and surreal performance art as a response to surrealism becoming mainstream. Jodorowsky worked out the story premise as a therapy to alleviate the depression he was in after the failure of his Dune project and presented the script to Giraud in 1977 during a visit to Paris. Deeming the story too short for a regular traditional comic, it was Giraud who suggested the story to be told on the format he had already introduced in Le Bandard Fool, to wit, as single-panel pages. On recommendation of Jodorowsky, he refined the format by relating the eagle's quest on the right-hand pages, while depicting the awaiting boy in smaller single-panel left-hand pages from a contrapoint of view. Giraud furthermore greatly increased his already high level of detail by making extensive use of ʒiʁo for the first time. Considered a key and seminal work, both for its art and storytelling, setting Jodorowsky off on his career as comic writer, the art evoked memories of the wood engravings from the 19th century, including those of Gustave Doré, that Giraud discovered and admired in the books of his grandparents when he was living there in his childhood. However, it, like La Deviation, has remained somewhat of a one-shot in Giraud's body of work in its utilization of such a high level of detail. The story, printed on yellow paper to accentuate the black and white art, was originally published directly as a to 5,000 copies limited book edition, gift item for relations of the publisher. It was only after expensive pirate editions started to appear that the publisher decided to make the work available commercially on a wider scale. Starting in 1981, Jodorowsky had intended the work to be the first of a trilogy, but that never came to fruition. In a certain way, Les Yeux du Chat concluded a phase that had started with La Deviation, and this viewpoint was adhered to by the publisher who had coined the era Les Années Metal Hurlant on one of its latter-day anthologies. The very first Mœbius anthology collection the publisher released as such was the 1980-1985 Mœbius Œuvres Completes 6-volume collection, of which 2 volumes 4, La Complainte de l'Homme Programme, and 5, Le Désintègre Réintègre, the two of them in essence comprising an expanded version of the 1980 original, or Mœbius art book. It also concluded a phase in which Giraud was preoccupied in a characteristic period in his life in which he was very somber and pessimistic about my life, resulting in several of his Mœbius stories of that period ending in death and destruction. These included the poetic ballade, in which Giraud killed off the 2 protagonists, something he came to regret a decade later in this particular case. In the magazine's issue 58 of 1980, Giraud started his famous Elenchel series in his third collaboration with Jodorowsky. However, by this time Giraud felt that his breakout success as Mœbius had come at a cost. He had left Pilot to escape the pressure and stifling conditions he was forced to work under, seeking complete creative freedom, but now it was increasingly becoming as stifling as it had been before with Blueberry, as he conceded in 1982, adding philosophically, "The more you free yourself, the more powerless you become." How deeply ingrained this sentiment was evidenced in a short interview in Metal Hurlant, issue 82, later that year, where an overworked Giraud stated, I will finish the Blueberry series. I will finish the John de Fool in Cal series, and then I'm done. Then I will quit comics. At the time he had just finished working as storyboard and production design artist on the movie Tron, something he had enjoyed immensely. Fortunately for his fans, Giraud did not act upon his impulse as history has shown, though he did take action to escape the hectic Parisian comic scene in 1980 by moving himself and his family as far away from Paris as possible in France, and relocated to the small city of Pau at the foothills of the Pyrenees. It was while he was residing in Pau that Giraud started to take an interest in the teachings of Jean-Paul Apelgaury, becoming an active member of his group and partaking in their gatherings. Tahiti 1983–1984. From 1985 to 2001 he also created his 6-volume fantasy series Le Monde de Dina, which has appeared in English as the Edina Cycle. The stories were strongly influenced by the teachings of Jean-Paul Apelgaury and Guy-Claude Berger's instinctotherapy. In effect, Giraud and his family did join Apelgaury's commune on Tahiti in 1983 until late 1984, when the family moved to the United States, where Giraud set up shop first in Santa Monica and subsequently in Venice and Woodland Hills, California. Giraud's one-shot comic book, La Nuit de l'Étoile, was co-written by Apelgaury and has been the most visible manifestation of Giraud's Say on Tahiti, aside from the art books La Mémoire du Futur and Venise Celeste. Concurrently collaborating on La Nuit de l'Étoile was young artist Marc Batty, also residing at the commune at the time, and for whom Giraud afterwards wrote the comic series Alter the Magic Crystal while in the U.S. It was under the influence of Apelgaury's teachings that Giraud conceived a third pseudonym, Jean Gur, formally introduced to the public as Jean Gur, Le Nouveau Mœbius in Venise Celeste p. 33, though Giraud had by the time of publication already dispensed with the pseudonym himself, which appeared on the art he created while on Tahiti, though not using it for his Edina Cycle. Another member of the commune was Paula Salomon, for whom Giraud had already illustrated her 1980 book La Parapsychologie et vous. Having to move stateside for work served Giraud well, as he became increasingly disenchanted at a later stage with the way Apelgaury ran his commune on Tahiti, in the process dispensing with his short-lived third pseudonym. His stay at the commune, though, had practical implications on his personal life. Giraud gave up eating meat, smoking, coffee, alcohol, and, for the time being, the use of mind-expanding substances, adhering to his newfound abstinence for the most part for the remainder of his life. During his stay on Tahiti, Giraud had co-founded his second publishing house under two concurrent imprints, Editions Gentian, predominantly for his work as Gur, most notably Blueberry, and Edina, predominantly for his work as Mœbius, and not entirely by coincidence named after the series he was working on at the time together with friend and former editor at Les. Both men had already released the very first such art book in the Humanoids days, and the format then conceived, to wit, a large 30x30 book format at first, with art organized around themes introduced by philosophical poetry, by Mœbius was adhered to for later such releases, including La Mémoire du Futur. Marvel Comics 1984–1989. There were thousands of professionals who knew my work. That has always amazed me every time I entered some graphics or animation studio, at Marvel or even at George Lucas. Mentioning the name Jean, Giraud did not cause any of the present pencilers, colorists, or storyboard artists to even bat an eye. Yet, whenever I introduced myself as Mœbius, all of them jumped up to shake my hand. It was incredible. After having arrived in California, Giraud's wife Claudine set up Giraud's third publishing house, Starwatcher Graphics, in 1985, essentially the U.S. branch of Gentian/Edina, with the same goals, resulting in the release of, among others, the extremely limited art portfolio La Cite de Feu, a collaborative art project of Giraud. However, due to their unfamiliarity with the American publishing world, the company did not do well, and in an effort to remedy the situation, Claudine hired the French/American editor couple Jean-Marc and Randy Lofficier, whom she had met at the summer 1985 San Diego Comic-Con, as editors-in-chief for Star Watcher, also becoming shareholders in the company. Already veterans of the U.S. publishing world and Mœbius fans, it was the Lofficier couple that managed to convince editor-in-chief Archie Goodwin of Marvel Comics to publish most of Mœbius' hitherto produced work on a wider scale in the U.S. in contrast with the heavy metal niche market release under its Epic imprint from 1987 to 1994. These, incidentally, included 3 of Mœbius' latter-day art books, as well as the majority of his Blueberry Western comic. It was for the Marvel/Epic publication effort that it was decided to dispense with the Jean Giraud/Mœbius dichotomy, until then strictly adhered to by the artist as both the artist's given name and his Blueberry Créé. Hergé. Blueberry Créé. This was contrary to his reputation as Mœbius, already acquired in the heavy metal days, and from then on used for all his work in the English-speaking world and Japan, though the dichotomy remained elsewhere, including native France. A 2-issue Silver Surfer miniseries, later collected as Silver Surfer Parable, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Giraud as Mœbius, was published through Marvel's Epic Comics imprint in 1988 and 1989. According to Giraud, this was his first time working under the Marvel method instead of from a full script, and he has admitted to being baffled by the fact that he already had a complete story synopsis on his desk only 2 days after he had met Stan Lee for the first time, having discussed what Giraud had assumed was a mere proposition over lunch. This miniseries won the Eisner Award for Best Finite/Limited Series in 1989. Mœbius' version was discussed in the 1995 submarine thriller Crimson Tide by 2 sailors pitting his version against those of Jack Kirby, with the main character played by Denzel Washington, emphasizing the Kirby one being the better of the 2. Becoming aware of the reference around 1997, Giraud was later told around 2005 by the movie's director Tony Scott that it was he who had written in the dialogue as an homage to the artist on behalf of his brother Ridley, a Mœbius admirer, and not uncredited script Dr. Quentin Tarantino, known for infusing his works with pop culture references. And amused Giraud quipped, "It's better than a big stature, because in a way, I cannot dream of anything better to be immortal than being in a movie about submarines." As a result, from his cooperation with Marvel, Giraud delved deeper into the American superhero mythology and created superhero art stemming from both Marvel and DC Comics, which were sold as art. Even as late as 1997, Giraud had created cover art for 2 DC comic book outings, Hardware Vol. 1 issue 49, March 1997, and Static Vol. 1 issue 45, March 1997, after an earlier cover for Marvel Tales Vol. 2, issue 253. Another project Giraud embarked upon in his American period was for a venture into that other staple of American pop culture, trading cards. Trading Card Company Comic Images released a Mœbius collector cards set in 1993, featuring characters and imagery from all over his Mœbius universe, though his Western work was excluded. None of the images were lifted from already existing work, but were especially created by Giraud the year previously. Although Giraud had taken up residence in California for 5 years, holding a temporary residence, the ominous one extraordinary ability category, including the international artist status visa, he maintained a transient lifestyle, as his work had him frequently travel to Belgium and native France, maintaining a home in Paris, as well as to Japan for extended periods of. His stay in the United States was an inspiration for his aptly called Made in L.A. art book, and much of his art he had produced in this period of time, including his superhero art, was reproduced in this and the follow-up art book Fusions, the latter of which having seen a translation in English by Epic. Giraud's extended stay in the U.S. garnered him a 1986 Inkpot Award, an additional 1991 Eisner Award, as well as 3 Harvey Awards in the period 1988–1991 for the various graphic novel releases by Marvel. It was in this period that Giraud, who had already picked up Spanish as a second language as a result from his various trips to Mexico and his dealings with Jodorowsky and his retinue, also picked up sufficient language skills to communicate in English. Later work 1990–2012. In late summer 1989, Giraud returned to France definitively, as it turned out, though that was initially not his intent. His family had already returned to France earlier, as his children wanted to start their college education in their native county, and wife Claudine had accompanied them to set up home in Paris. However, it also turned out that his transient lifestyle had taken its toll on the marriage, causing the couple to drift apart, and it was decided upon his return to enter into a living apart together relationship, which allowed for an enormous freedom and sincerity without demands and frustrations for both spouses, according to the artist. Additionally, Giraud had met Isabelle Champeville during a book signing in Venice, Italy in February 1984, and entered into a relationship with her in 1987, which resulted in the birth of second son Raphael in 1989. Giraud's marriage with Claudine was legally ended in December 1994, without much drama according to Giraud, as both spouses had realized that each wanted something different out of life. Exemplary of the marriage ending without any ill will was that Claudine was still emphatically acknowledged for her contributions in the 1997 art book Blueberries and the documentary made for the occasion of its release. Giraud and Isabelle were married on 13 May 1995, and the union resulted in their second child, daughter Nausicaa, the same year. For Giraud, his second marriage was of such great personal importance that he henceforth considered his life divided in a pre-Isabelle part and a post-Isabelle part, having coined his second wife the key to the whole grand design. Isabelle's sister and Giraud's sister-in-law, Claire, became a regular contributor as colorist on Giraud's latter-day work. The changes in his personal life were also accompanied with changes in his business holdings during 1988–1990. His co-founded publishing house Gentian/Edina went into receivership in 1988, going bankrupt a short time thereafter. The American subsidiary Star Watcher Graphics followed in its wake around the turn of the millennium, partly because it was a shared marital possession of the original Giraud couple, and partly because the publication efforts of his work in the United States had run its course. In 1989, Giraud sold his shares in Les Humanoides Assassins to Fabrice Giger, thereby formally severing his ownership ties with the publisher, which however remained the regular publisher of his Mœbius work from the Metal Hurlant era, including Elinkel. Together with Claudine, he founded Stardom in 1990, his first true family-operated business without any outside participation, according to Giraud, with the 1525-copy limited mini-art portfolio Maca Carnet de Bord becoming the company's first recorded publication in September the same year. Apart from being a publishing house, it was concurrently an art gallery located on 27 Rue Falguier, 75,015 Paris, organizing themed exhibitions on a regular basis. In 1997, the company was renamed Mœbius Production Singular, despite the occasional and erroneous use of the plural, even by the company itself. The company, in both publishing and art gallery iterations, is as of 2017 still being run by Isabelle Giraud, who had taken over the function of publishing editor and co-ownership from Claudine, explaining the renaming of the company. After the latter's marriage with Giraud was dissolved in 1994, and her sister Claire. The first thing Giraud did creatively upon his return was to finish up on the Blueberry album, Arizona Love, on his own after his longtime writing partner Jean Mitchell Charlier had died on 10 July 1989. Due to his intimate 25-year familiarity with both the series and its writer, it was a foregone conclusion that Giraud would from then on take on the scripting of the main Blueberry series as well, especially since it was already agreed upon in the contracts signed with Jean Mitchell that the survivor would take over the series. Stunned by the sudden death of his longtime co-worker, though, he could not bring himself to work on the art for Blueberry afterwards for nearly 5 years before he embarked on Blueberry again as artist. Giraud stated that the series had lost its father, and that the mother needed time to mourn. Nonetheless, he did embark on the Marshall Blueberry spin-off series in 1990 as writer, leaving the artwork firstly to William Vance and subsequently to Mitchell Rouge, wanting to pay homage to the legacy of his late writing partner by creating a story in his spirit, or, as Giraud had put it, "And I said to myself, well, I'm going to see if I'm." In similar vein, Giraud took up the writing for the other Charlier/Giraud Western creation, Jim Cutlass, that Charlier had actually been in the process of revitalizing in the year before his death, and for which he had already contracted Christian Rossi for the artwork, besides having already started on the scenario. After having added 6 more volumes to the once one-shot series, the series which he, as explained above, had published at publisher Casterman instead of Western House publisher Dargaud, folded in 1999 due to the fact that it was not nearly as commercially successful as Blueberry had been. Under his Mœbius pseudonym, Giraud concurrently continued to work on the Edina cycle and the Madwoman of the Sacred Heart trilogy, both of which started in the U.S. and completed in 2001 and 1998 respectively, after which he concentrated on Blueberry's OK Corral cycle, started in 1994 upon his return. While Giraud was in the midst of OK Corral cycle, he also embarked on a new sequel cycle of his acclaimed Incal main series, called Après Elincal, after the Incal. Yet, after he had penciled the first outing in the series, Le Nouveau Rêve, he found himself confronted with too many things that attract me, too many desires in all the senses, causing him to be no longer able to devote myself to the bande dessinée as befitting a professional in the traditional sense. Despite repeated pleas to convince Giraud otherwise, it left writer Jodorowsky with no other recourse than to start anew with a new artist. This insight had repercussions, though, as Giraud, after he had finished the OK Corral cycle in 2005, as Mœbius production, Giraud published from 2000 to 2010 inside Mœbius French text despite English title, an illustrated autobiographical fantasy in 6 hardcover volumes totaling 700 pages. Pirandello-like, he appears in cartoon form as both creator and protagonist trapped within the story alongside his younger self and several longtime characters such as Blueberry, Arzach, the latest respelling of the Arzach character's name, Major Grubert from the Airtight Garage, and others. Jean Giraud drew the first of the 2-part volume of the Roman 13 series, titled La Version Irlandaise, the Irish version, from a script by Jean Van Ham, to accompany the second part by the regular team Jean Van Ham, William Vance, Le Dernier Round, the Last Round. Both parts were published on the same date, 13 November 2007, and were the last ones written by Van Ham before Yves Sens took over the series. The contribution was also a professional courtesy to the series artist, Vance, who had previously provided the artwork for the first 2 titles in the by Giraud written Marshall Blueberry spin-off series. Late in life, Giraud also decided to revive his seminal Arzach character in an elaborate new adventure series, the first and last in hindsight volume of a planned trilogy. Arzach et l'Arpenteur appeared in 2010. He also added to the Airtight Garage series with 2 volumes entitled Le Chasseur de Prime 2008 and Major 2011, as well as the art book L'Enfant de Mars 2011, the latter 2 initially released in a limited 1,000-copy French-only print run by Mœbius Production. By this time, Giraud created his comic art on a specialized graphic computer tablet, as its enlargement features had become an indispensable aid because of his failing eyesight. Creating comics became increasingly difficult for Giraud, as his eyesight started to fail him in his last years, having undergone severe surgery in 2010 to stave off blindness in his left eye, and it was mainly for this reason that Giraud increasingly concentrated on creating single-piece art, both as Gir and as Mœbius, on larger canvases on either commission. Much of the latter artwork was from 2005 onward, alongside older original art Giraud still had in his possession, sold by the company for considerable prices in specialized comic auctions at such auction houses like Art Curiel, Hotel Drouot, and Milan and Assassin's. Illustrator and author. As already indicated above, Giraud had throughout his entire career made illustrations for books, magazines, music productions. Though playing the piano and electric guitar, Giraud was, unlike his second son Raphael, regrettably not a creative musician himself by his own admission, but did have a lifelong fascination with jazz, but also promotion. A notable early example of the latter concerned the blueberry art he created in 1978 for the Spanish jeans manufacturer Lois Jeans and Jackets. Aside from being traditionally run as an advertisement in numerous magazines, it was also blown up to gigantic, mural-like dimensions and as posters plastered on walls and billboards in several places. As book illustrator, Giraud illustrated, for example, the 1987 first edition of the science fiction novel Project Pendulum by Robert Silverberg and the 1994 French edition of the novel The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. The subsequent year Giraud followed up in the same vein as the Coelho novel, with his cover and interior illustrations for a French 1995 reprint of ballads from the French medieval poet Franco-Belgian. Much of this non-comic art, including the one for Lois, has been reproduced in the art books that were released over the years. In 1999, Giraud's illustrations appeared in an edition of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, published by the Møbius Gallery in Milan. He illustrated the third volume, Paradiso, while Inferno and Purgatorio were illustrated by Lorenzo Mattei and Milton Glaser respectively. The edition was published under the Mœbius name. Giraud's illustrations for Paradiso take heavy inspiration from the engravings of the Divine Comedy by Gustave Doré, with compositions often approaching an exact match. Giraud acknowledged this influence directly, praising Doré's work and remarking how he sometimes literally used tracing paper to sketch compositions. Though another prominent example of Giraud's non-comic book work, the influences from his science fiction and fantasy comics shine through. The illustrations, with vivid colors and space-age headdresses, are distinctly rendered in the Mœbius mode. An out-of-the-ordinary latter-day contribution as such constituted his illustrations as Mœbius for the Thursday 6 March 2008 issue of the Belgian newspaper Le Soir. His illustrations accompanied news articles throughout the newspaper, providing a Mœbiusian look on events. In return, the newspaper, for the occasion entitled Le Soir Par by Mœbius, featured 2 half-page editorials on the artist pp. 20 and 37. Under the names Giraud, Gir, and Mœbius, he also wrote several comics for other comic artists as listed below, and the early ones including Jacques Tardy and Claude Auclair. Aside from writing for other comic artists, he also wrote story outlines for the movies Les Maîtres du Temps, Internal Transfer, Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland, and Through the Mœbius strip as outlined further down the line. As author on personal title, Giraud has, apart from his own bande dessinée scripts, written philosophical poetry that accompanied his art in his Mœbius art books of the 1980s and 1990s. He also wrote the story notes editorials for the American Epic publications, providing background information on his work contained therein. In 1998, he took time off to write his autobiography, Mœbius Giraud, Histoire de mon double. Films. Tron was not a big hit. The movie went out in theaters in the same week as E.T. and, oh, that was a disaster for it. There was also Blade Runner and Star Trek that summer, so it was a battle of giants. Tron was a piece of energy trying to survive. It is still alive. It survives. And the new movie is what Steven wanted to do back then, but at that time CG was very odd and we were pioneers. I almost did the first computer animated feature. After that, it was called Star Watcher. We had the story, we had the preparation done, we were ready to start. But it came apart. The company did not give us the approval. It was too far the concept to do everything in computer animation. We were waiting, and then our producer died in a car accident. Everything collapsed. That was my third contribution to animation and my worst experience. Les Maîtres du Temps is a strange story. It's a small movie, and cheap, incredibly cheap. It was more than independent. When I saw the film for the first time, I was ashamed. It's not a Disney movie, definitely. But because the movie has maybe a flavor, a charm, it is still alive after all that time. More than 35 years now, and it is still here. Giraud's friend Jean-Claude Mézières has divulged in the 1970s that their very first outing into the world of cinema concerned a 1957 animated Western, unsurprisingly considering their shared passion for the genre. Giraud, with his newfound prestige because of his trip to Mexico, note, Mézières had wanted to accompany his friend to Mexico, but was not able any further movie aspirations. Giraud, who himself had considered the effort too laborious, might have had entertained, had to wait until he received the 1974 invitation of Alejandro Jodorowsky to work on his planned adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, which was, however, abandoned in pre-production. Jodorowsky's Dune, a 2013 American-French documentary directed by Frank Pavich, explores Jodorowsky's unsuccessful attempt. Giraud, a non-English speaker at the time, later admitted that the prospect of moving over to Los Angeles filled him with trepidation, initially causing him to procrastinate. It was friend Philip Droulet, with whom he would co-found Les Humanoides Assassin's later that year, who pushed him to up and go, which he did by going AWOL again from his job at Pilot. Giraud was grateful for Droulet pushing him, as he found that he reveled in his first Hollywood experience. In the end, the project took 9 months before it fell apart, but Giraud's presence was not always required, giving him ample time to return to France on several occasions to pursue his other work, such as his work for Elico des Savines and, most importantly, to firstly finish up on Blueberry's Angel Face, which he ultimately did in record time. Despite Jodorowsky's project falling through, it had attracted the attention of other movie makers. One of them was Ridley Scott, who managed to reassemble a large part of Jodorowsky's original creative team, including Giraud, for his 1979 science fiction thriller Alien. Hired as a concept artist, Giraud's stay on the movie lasted only a few days, as he had obligations elsewhere. Nonetheless, his designs for the Nostromo crew attire, and their spacesuits in particular, were almost one-on-one adopted by Scott and appearing on screen as designed, resulting in what Giraud had coined 2 weeks of work and 10 years of fallout in media and advertising. Scott did explicitly acknowledge Mœbius for his contributions in the special features for the movie in the Alien Quadrilogy home media collection. Scott was taken with Giraud's art, having cited The Long Tomorrow as an influence on his second major movie Blade Runner of 1982, see below, and invited him again for both this and his subsequent third major movie Legend of 1985, which Giraud had to decline in both cases for, again, obligations elsewhere. He especially regretted not having been able to work on the latter movie, having deemed it very good, and it was still on his mind as late as 2010, as he directly referred to the movie when he made his unicorn statement regarding his legacy. Quoted below. 1981 saw the release of the animated film Heavy Metal, produced by Ivan Reitman. The heavily Arzach-inspired last, Tarna section of the movie has led to the persistent misconception, especially held in the United States, that Giraud had provided characters and situations for the segment, albeit uncredited. Giraud, however, had already emphatically squashed that particular misconception himself on an early occasion. "I had absolutely nothing to do with it," stated the artist in 1982. Sure, the people who made the movie were inspired by quite a few things from Arzach, further explaining that, while the American producers had indeed intended to use the artist's material, the American producers went ahead regardless of the agreements made between them and Metal Hurlant. While not particularly pleased with the fact, Giraud was amused when third parties wanted to sue the Americans on his behalf. Giraud, however, managed to convince his editor-in-chief Jean-Pierre Dionnet, one of his co-founding friends of Metal Hurlant, to let the issue slide, as he found all that fuss with lawyers not worth his while, aside from the incongruous circumstance that the French magazine was running advertisements for the American movie. Still, Alien led to two other movie assignments in 1982, this time as both concept and storyboard artist. The first one concerned the Disney science fiction movie Tron, whose director Steven Lisberger specifically requested Giraud after he had discovered his work in Heavy Metal magazine. The second assignment concerned Giraud's collaboration with director René Laloux to create the science fiction feature-length animated movie Les Maîtres du Temps, released in English as Time Masters, based on a novel by Stephen Wall. He and director René Laloux shared the award for Best Children's Film at the Fantastival that year. For the latter, Giraud was also responsible for the poster art and the comic adaptation of the same title, with some of his concept and storyboard art featured in a making-of book to boot. Accepting Les Maîtres du Temps, Giraud's movie work had him travel to Los Angeles for longer periods of time. Outside his actual involvement with motion pictures, Giraud was in this period of time also occasionally commissioned to create poster art for predominantly European movies. Movies for which Giraud, also as Mœbius, created poster art included Touche pas à la femme blanche, 1974 as GUR 3 120-160 cm versions, as *P*** Y** S 1974, unsigned American movie, but poster art for release in France, Vous n'y l'emporterez pas aux Paradis 1975, unsigned, Les Chiens 1979, as Mœbius. As his two 1982 movies coincided with the end of his Metal Hurlant days and his departure for Tahiti shortly thereafter, this era can be seen as Giraud's first Hollywood period, especially since the next project he embarked on entailed a movie in which he was very much invested as initiator, writer, and producer as well, contrary to the movies he hitherto had worked on. While Giraud was residing in Appelgris commune, he, together with Appelgris and another member of the commune, Paula Salomon, came up with a story premise for a major animated science fiction movie called Internal Transfer, which was endowed with the English title Starwatcher, after which Giraud's American publishing house was named. Slated for the production was Arnie Wung, whom Giraud had met during the production of Tron and, incidentally, one of the animators of the vaunted Tarna segment of the Heavy Metal movie, and it was actually Disney whom Giraud offered the production first. Disney, at the time not believing in the viability of such a production in animation, declined. Another member of the commune fronted some of the money for the project to proceed, and the production was moved to Wung's animation studio in Los Angeles. It was this circumstance that provided Giraud with his alibi to leave Appelgris commune and settle in California, and the reason why he had to decline Ridley Scott for his Legend movie. Much to Giraud's disappointment and frustration, though, the project eventually fell apart for several extraneous reasons, most notably for lack of funding, as related above by the artist. Still, the concept art he provided for the project served as the basis for his first collaboration with Geoff Darrow, whom he had met previously on the production of Tron on their 1985 City of Fire art portfolio. Some of the concept art was reprinted in the art book Made in L.A. Yet, despite this failure to launch, it did lead to his, what can be considered, second Hollywood period in his American period. Concurrent with his career as a comic artist in the United States, invitations followed to participate as concept artist on Masters of the Universe 1987, Willow 1988, The Abyss 1989, and finally Yutaka Fujioka's Japanese animated feature film Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland 1989. For It was for this movie that Giraud resided in Japan for an extended period of time. Giraud followed up on his involvement with Little Nemo by writing the first two outings of the 1994–2000 French graphic novel series of the same name, drawn by Bruno Marchand. His definitive return to France in 1989 marked the beginning of Giraud's third and last movie period. Giraud made original character designs and did visual development for Warner Bros. Partly animated 1996 movie Space Jam. 1997 saw his participation as concept artist on Luc Besson's science fiction epic The Fifth Element, which was of great personal importance for Giraud as it meant working together with his lifelong friend Jean-Claude Mézières, coming full circle after their very first 1957 attempt at creating a motion picture. The 2005 documentary made for this occasion was testament to the great friendship both men had for each other. Concurrently, Giraud's oldest child, daughter Helene, was employed on the movie in a similar function, albeit uncredited, though Giraud had stated with fatherly pride, yes, she had cooperated in a truly engaged manner. She started at the crack of dawn and only went home in the evening, after the whole team had stopped working. Giraud's experience on the movie was, however, somewhat marred by the 2004 lawsuit publisher Les Humanoids Assassins ostentatiously on his behalf, like the earlier 1981 intent which Giraud had then success. Movie adaptations. In 1991, his graphic novel short, Caucamar Blanc, was cinematized by Matthew Kassovitz, winning Kassovitz but not Giraud 2 film awards. With Arzach Rhapsody, Giraud saw his ambitions as a full-fledged animation movie maker at least in part fulfilled. A 2002 series for French television broadcaster France 2, it consisted of 14 four-minute-long animated vignettes based on Giraud's seminal character, for which he did the writing, drawings, and co-production. Young daughter Nausicaa had voice-over appearances in 3 of the episodes together with her father. The Blueberry series was adapted for the screen in 2004 by Jan Koonin as Blueberry, l'expérience secrète. 2 previous attempts to bring Blueberry to the silver screen in the 1980s had fallen through. American actor Martin Kove had actually already been signed to play the titular role for one of the attempts, and who, as it turned out decades later, had even traveled to Europe to shoot some test footage scenes from the comic series in this role in order to entice potential investors. Convinced that the project was a viable one, Kove has revealed that he, together with the 2 Blueberry creators, put up their own money when the project was falling apart due to arguments about funding among the would-be producers, to no avail, however, as it turned out. 2010 saw the adaptation of La Planète, Encore the Still Planet, a short story from the Le Monde did. Mœbius Production served as a production company, with Sable Giraud serving as one of its producers. Giraud himself was one of the 2 directors of the short, and it premiered at the Mœbius Transiform exposition at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain in Paris. Exhibitions. Part of the many desires that increasingly attracted Giraud later in life, steering him away from creating traditional bandes dessinées, was his personal fascination and involvement with the many exhibitions dedicated to his work that started to proliferate from the mid-1990s onward, not only in native France, but internationally as well. Summer 1991, exposition at the Maison de la Culture Frontenac, Montreal, Canada, 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 Canada. 26 April–16 August 1995, Mœbius, a retrospective exposition at the Cartoon Art Museum, San Francisco, USA, came with limited edition catalogue, see below. December 1995, Wanted Blueberry exposition at the Arthod Grenet Mega Bookstore, Grenoble, France, also featuring original Blueberry art by Colin Wilson. Othie and Jean Giraud attended the opening on 1 December, making themselves also available for book signings. Prior to the opening, a promotional brochure was disseminated by the bookstore Arthod BD News, Issue 1, November 1995, featuring a 3-page interview with Giraud. 19 September–9 October 1996, Jean Giraud Blueberry Exposition at the Stardom Gallery, Paris, France, for the occasion of the upcoming release of the Blueberries art book by Stardom Giraud's own publishing house/art gallery. The below-mentioned 1997 documentary was the registration of events surrounding the release, including the exhibition. August 1997, Giraud/Mœbius themed festival BD de Salisville, France, co-produced with Stardom. A special festival guide, illustrated by Giraud, having received the festival's most prestigious comic award the previous year. 10 October–9 November 1997, Mœbius Infinito Grand Exposition, Deposito Ferroviario a Lali, Palermo, and on 7 February–29 March 1998, Palazzo Querini Stampalia, Venice, Italy. The softcover art book Mœbius Infinito, Oclock 40,845. 29 November 1997, 11 January 1998, Mœbius, Pisoni Define Melanio Grand Exposition, Palazzo Bagatti Velsecchi, Milan, Italy. The softcover art book Mœbius, Pisoni Define Melanio ISBN 8,886,456,420. December 1998, January 1990. Musée d'Art Contemporain de Lyon, France. 30 June–14 November 1999. 1 Montreal Exposition at Fondation Cartier, Paris, France. 26 January–3 September 2000. Trait de Génie Giraud Exposition, Centre National de la Bande dessinée et de l'Image, Angoulême, France. The 48-page illustrated exhibition catalogue Trait de Génie Giraud Mœbius ISBN 2,907,848,200, enhanced with elaborate background information and an in-depth interview with the artist. The book edition was limited to 2,000 copies. May–June 2000, Großausstellung, Erlangen, Germany. May 2000, Collective Exposition on Contemporary Comics at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Paris, France. October 2001, Grand Exposition, Montreux, France. January–February 2003, Großausstellung in the Museum für Neue Kunst, Karlsruhe, Germany. June 2003, Great Exposition, Kemi, Finland. 16 November–31 December 2003, Giraud Mœbius Exposition, Grand Mange Kasern Fonk. 4 March–28 April 2004, L'Elixir du Dr. Gur/Mœbius Exposition, Galerie Arludic, Paris, France. December 2004 April 2005, Giraud/Mœbius and Hayao Miyazaki Exposition at the Musée de la Monnaie de Paris, France. 15 March–15 April 2005, Jean Giraud Exposition de dessins et planches originales de Dust le Nouvel Album de Blueberry aux Editions d'Argaud, Galerie Arludic, Paris, France. Small exhibition for the occasion of the 28th Blueberry album release. June 2005, Exposition Mives Grecs at the Stardom/Mœbius Production Art Gallery, Paris, France. December 2005, Jardins d'Arras Exposition at the Stardom/Mœbius Production Art Gallery, Paris, France. February 2006, Exposition sur le thème du rêve at the Centre d'Arts Plastiques Contemporains de Bordeaux, France. October 2006, Bouteline Exposition at the Stardom/Mœbius Production Art Gallery, Paris, France. May 2007, Exposition Seoul, South Korea. May 2007, Homajo Major Exposition at the Stardom/Mœbius Production Art Gallery, Paris, France. February 2008, La Citadelle du Vertige Attraction from Futuroscope, Poitiers, France, inspired by the Garage Hermétique universe. June 2008, Fouet Cavalier Exposition at l'Espace Courtambert / Mœbius Production, Paris, France, 15 January - 14 June 2009. Blueberry Exposition at the Maison de la Bande dessinée, Brussels, Belgium, May 2009. Exposition at the Kyoto International Manga Museum, Japan. November 2009. Arzach, Destination Tassili Exposition at the SFL building located at 103 Rue de Grenelle, Paris, France. Co-production of Espace Courtambert / SFL / Mœbius Production. 12 October 2010 13 March 2011. Mœbius Transiform Exposition at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain, Paris, France, which the museum had called the first major exhibition in Paris devoted to the work of Jean Giraud, known by his pseudonyms Giraud and Mœbius. A major and prestigious event, it reflected the status Giraud had by then attained in French comic culture. A massive, limited edition deluxe art book was released by the museum for the occasion. June-December 2011. Mœbius Multiples Exposition at the Musée Thomas Henry, Cherbourg Octeville, France, 15 September 2019 29 March 2020. Mœbius Surreal Comiquelton Exposition at the Max Ernst Museum Brühl des LVR, Brühl, Germany. A massive 272-page hardcover art book, similar to the one released by the Parisian Museum in 2010, was released as a deluxe, limited edition exposition catalogue by the museum for the occasion. No ISBN mentioned, but assigned the ISBN 9,783,944,453,187 by the German National Library. The exposition, though, was prematurely closed on 14 March 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. 25 October 2021 25 October 2021. Hell, Purgatory, Paradise, Divine Illustrations Exposition at the Academy of Fine Arts in Florence, Italy. The exhibition was held to celebrate the 700th anniversary of Dante's death and included the illustrations of Giraud, Lorenzo Mattotti, and Milton Glaser, previously compiled in a 1999 illustrated edition of the Divine Comedy. Stamps. In 1988, Giraud was chosen, among 11 other winners of the prestigious Grand Prix of the Angoulême Festival, to illustrate a postage stamp set issued on the theme of communication. Style. Giraud's working methods were various and adaptable, ranging from etchings, white and black illustrations, to work in color of the lean clair genre and watercolors. Giraud's solo Blueberry works were sometimes criticized by fans of the series because the artist dramatically changed the tone of the series as well as the graphic style. However, Blueberry's early success was also due to Giraud's innovations, as he did not content himself with following earlier styles, an important aspect of his development as an artist. To distinguish between work by Giraud and Mœbius, Giraud used a brush for his own work and a pen when he signed his work as Mœbius. Giraud was known for being an astonishingly fast draftsman. His style has been compared to the Nouveau Realistes, exemplified in his turn from the Baudelarized realism of Hergé's Tintin towards a grittier style depicting sex, violence, and moral bankruptcy. Aided with the use of mind-expanding substances in the first part of his career, Giraud had cultivated various New Age-type philosophies throughout his career, such as Guy Claude Berger's instinctotherapy, which influenced his creation of the comic book series Le Monde de Dina. However, he dispensed with the use of drugs for the time being himself, though not condemning them. Quite the contrary, as Giraud considered them a gateway to a hidden dream world ever since he was introduced in 1974 to the writings of Carlos Castaneda, and having started again with the use of marijuana in the last decade of his life after a long abstinence, and, however, It also negatively influenced his relationship with Philip Charlier, heir and steward of his father's Blueberry co-creation, and legacy, who had no patience whatsoever with Giraud's New Age predilections, particularly for his admitted fondness for mind-expanding substances. As 50% brand co-owner, Charlier Jr. has vetoed several later Blueberry project proposals by Giraud, the aforementioned Blueberry 1900 project in particular, precisely for these reasons, as they were to prominently feature vision and style. In the documentary Mœbius 2010, he claims his different styles may stem from his short-sightedness. When drawing without glasses, he is more attuned to fine details, but disconnected from the external world. But when drawing with glasses on, he does not get into details, but is more aware of the big picture. He often starts with glasses on to have a global perspective, then later continues without glasses. Death. Giraud died in Paris on 10 March 2012, aged 73, after a long battle with cancer. The immediate cause of death was pulmonary embolism caused by a lymphoma. Fellow comic artist Franco-Belgian, incidentally, the artist pegged by Giraud in person for the artwork of the cancelled Blueberry 1900 project, stated that Mœbius was a master of realist drawing with a real talent for humor, which he was still demonstrating with the nurses when I saw him in his hospital bed a fortnight ago. Giraud was buried on 15 March in the Montparnasse Cemetery, after the funeral services held in the St. Clotilde Basilica. Many friends and representatives from the Franco-Belgian comic world and beyond attended the services, mirroring Giraud's entire career in the industry. The French government was represented by its Minister of Culture, Frédéric Mitterrand, nephew of the former president of France François Mitterrand, who had personally awarded Giraud with his first civilian knighthood 27 years earlier. Giraud left his estate to his second wife Isabelle and his 4 children. Biography. Throughout his entire career, Jean Giraud gave numerous interviews both in Europe as well as in the United States, but it is the series of interview sessions conducted by comics journalist Numa Sadel that warrants special attention. Sadel took a particular interest in the artist and followed the career of Giraud closely from the mid-1970s onward until the latter's death in 2012, conducting extensive in-depth interviews with the artist throughout this period of time, with approximate 2-decade intervals, which resulted in 3 consecutive chronologically organized interview books. Excepting parts of the first book in Schrampf, Les Cahiers de la Bede, issue 25, July 1974, none of the later interviews had seen prior magazine publication, be it in part or in whole. The Schrampf interview excerpt was by Giraud, poured into a humorous 8-page autobiographical black and white comic pp. 816. The comic, entitled Entretien avec Jean Giraud, or Mœbius circa 74 as it is known in English, was however only reprinted in the 2015 edition of Sadel book as a preface and in hindsight a precursor to Giraud's autobiographical Inside Mœbius comic books. The similarity had not been lost on the artist himself after he had embarked on the Inside Mœbius series and realized, Merd, that is exactly like the comic I have done with Numa. Noteworthy were the testimonials Sadel collected from seminal persons in Giraud's life and career, which included, among others, his mother, first wife Claudine. Of these 2, the only known published. For editorial reasons, Sadel omitted some of the outside testimonials from the second edition for his third. Posthumously published, the 2015 title was fully sanctioned and endorsed by Giraud's widow Isabelle, who provided a foreword praising Sadel for his friendship and tenacity, family pictures, privately created art, and additional details on her husband's last 2 years of his life, and has therefore become the closest approximation of an official biography of the latter, published as an unillustrated paperback in 1999, was the biography written by Giraud on Mœbius and vice versa, but constituted what Sadel in his 2015 edition has coined a snapshot in time, aside from the obvious fact that the last phase of the artist's career was not covered. Giraud himself considered his enhanced autobiography, on which he had worked for a year, a funny piece of work, conceding that accuracy was left to be desired as he could not be bothered to correct mistakes made therein, finding flavor in the small inaccuracies, and also admitting that he gave his work only a cursory glance afterwards. Author Ʒiʁo accounted for his work in the introduction of the 2015 edition, where he summarized that the interviews for the first edition took 3 days in March 1974 and in August and September 1907. Having kept more detailed records, the second edition took in total 19 hours and 45 minutes of interviews conducted between 18 and 21 October 1988 at the Ʒiʁo's home in Cagnes-sur-Mer, for which Giraud and his future wife Is, augmented with an additional 2 hours at Giraud's home in Paris on 17 August 19. The third edition accounted for a further 10 hours and 48 minutes worth of interviews conducted between 15 September 2000 and 28 December 2011, either at Giraud's home in Paris or over the telephone. Ʒiʁo acknowledged that the 3 series of interview sessions were snapshots in time of Giraud's life and career, causing the artist to occasionally contradict himself in later life, something Giraud himself actually addressed in a humorous fashion in his Inside Mœbius comics by regularly confronting his older self with his younger version. Ʒiʁo's reasoning was that by doing so, it reflected truthfully the spiritual development the artist had undergone throughout his career. Influence and legacy. They said that I changed their life. You changed my life. Your work is why I became an artist, an artist, an artist. Oh, it makes me happy. But at same time I have an internal broom to clean it all up. It can be dangerous to believe it. Someone wrote, Mœbius is a legendary artist. It puts a frame around me. A legend now, I am like a unicorn. Many artists from around the world have cited Giraud as an influence on their work. Testament to this was the publication of 2 special homage issues of the French comic journals Casemate-Hors Serai 3 and DBD-Hors Serai 9 a month after Giraud's death. The original ʒiʁo Pearl album cover endowed 84-page Casemate issue featured, aside from an elaborate in memoriam overview of Giraud's life and career, testimonials from 89 predominantly European comic artists who often had their testimonials accompanied with their own Giraud/Mœbius themed art made for the occasion. For the 96-page DVD issue, which came in 2 cover variants, Giraud, Mort d'un Géant Giraud, Death of a Giant, and Mœbius, Adieu à l'immortal Mœbius, Farewell to an Immortal, over 100 comic artists, this time added with international overseas artists, contributed art as tribute to the deceased artist. In January 2013, a similarly executed 64-page homage reverse double-cover journal became the first issue of the newly launched Tonnerre de Bulls comics journal as issue Hors Serai 1, which was followed by a similar 76-page Mœbius themed double-cover issue Hors Serai 5 in October 2015. Both issues were limited to 650 copies. The testimonials quoted below, gathered from other sources, are but a far from complete random selection of all the accolades given to the artist. Giraud was longtime friends with manga author and anime filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki. Giraud even named his daughter Nausicaa after the character in Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Asked by Giraud in an interview how he first discovered his work, Miyazaki replied, through Arzach, which dates from 1975, I believe. I only read it in 1980, and it was a big shock. Not only for me. All manga authors were shaken by this work. Unfortunately, when I discovered it, I already had a consolidated style, so I couldn't use its influence to enrich my drawing. Even today, I think it has an awesome sense of space. I directed Nausicaa under Mœbius's influence. Mike Mignola, creator of Hellboy, has stated upon seeing Arzach, I fell out of love with American comics, lost interest in the superhero subject matter, was more interested in the fantasy I saw in the European art. Pioneering cyberpunk author William Gibson said of Giraud's work The Long Tomorrow, So it's entirely fair to say, and I've said it before, that the way Neuromancer the novel looks was influenced in large part by some of the artwork I saw in heavy metal. I assume that this must also be true of John Carpenter's Escape from New York. Those French guys, they got their end in early. The Long Tomorrow also came to the attention of Ridley Scott and was a key visual reference for Blade Runner. Having previously cooperated with the artist on his 1979 sci-fi thriller Alien, Scott stated as late as 2010 on Mœbius' influence on contemporary science fiction movies, "You see it everywhere. It runs through so much you can't get away from it." Comic artist, publisher, and editor Stephen R. Bissett, responsible for the first-time publication of Les Yeux du Chat in English, had it recorded that, "When I first saw the work of Mœbius aka Gur, both noms de plume of Jean Giraud, his fresh science fiction and fantasy comic art forever altered my perception of the comic medium." George Lucas, who had invited Giraud to work with him on his 1988 fantasy movie Willow, wrote in the foreword of the 1989 The Art of Mœbius art book, "In all his drawings, Mœbius demonstrates a command of many disciplines in art. He is a master draftsman, a superb artist, and more, his vision is original and strong." Since first seeing the Mœbius illustrations in heavy metal years ago, I have been impressed and affected by his keen and unusual sense of design and the distinctive way in which he depicts the fantastic. Perhaps what strikes me most of all his work is its sheer beauty of beauty that has always given me great pleasure. British author and comic artist Neil Gaiman, with whom Giraud collaborated on Gaiman's The Sandman series, stated, "I read Metal Hurlant over and over and envied the French because they had everything I dreamed of in comics: beautifully drawn, visionary and literate comics for adults. I wanted to make comics like that when I grew up." "I consider him more important than Dore," said Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini. "He's a unique talent endowed with an extraordinary visionary imagination that's constantly renewed and never vulgar. Mœbius disturbs and consoles. He has the ability to transport us into unknown worlds where we encounter unsettling characters. My admiration for him is total. I consider him a great artist, as great as Picasso and Matisse." Following Giraud's death, Brazilian author Paulo Coelho paid tribute on Twitter, stating, "The great Mœbius died today, but the great Mœbius is still alive. Your body died today, your work is more alive than ever." Benoit Mouchart, artistic director at France's Angoulême International Comics Festival, made an assessment of his importance to the field of comics. "France has lost one of its best-known artists in the world. In Japan, Italy, in the United States, he is an incredible star who influenced world comics. Mœbius will remain part of the history of drawing in the same right as Dürer or Ingres. He was an incredible producer. He said he wanted to show what eyes do not always see." French culture minister Frédéric Mitterrand, speaking at his funeral services at St. Clotilde Basilica on 15 March 2012, said that by the simultaneous death of Giraud and Mœbius, France had lost two great artists. Awards and honors. 1969 and 1970, Prix Phoenix Paris for Lieutenant Blueberry in the category La Meilleure Série d'Aventures. 1972, Best Realistic Artist Special Award from the National Cartoonists Society for Lieutenant Blueberry. 1973, ʒiʁo Award for Lieutenant Blueberry in the category Best Foreign Comic Series, shared with Jean-Michel Charlier. 1975, Yellow Kid Award, Luca Comics and Games in the category Best Foreign Artist. 1977, Angoulême International Comics Festival Best French Artist. 1978, Goldene Sprechvlees Award Vereniging for Comic Literature for Lieutenant Blueberry in the category Besonder Verdienst die Comic Literature. 1979, Adamson Award for Lieutenant Blueberry in the category Best International Comic Strip or Comic Book Cartoonist. 1980, Yellow Kid Award, Luca Comics and Games in the category Best Foreign Author. 1980, Grand Prix de la Science Fiction Francaise, Special Prize for Major Fatal. 1981. Grand Prix de la Ville d'Angoulême, Angoulême International Comics Festival. 1982. Fantafestival Award for Les Maîtres du Temps in the category Best Children's Film, shared with director René Laloux. 1985. 1985. 1986. Inkpot Award. Awarded. 1988. Harvey Award for Mœbius album series by Marvel/Epic in the category Best American Edition of Foreign Material. 1989. Eisner Award for Silver Surfer in the category Best Finite Series. 1989. Harvey Award for Incal by Marvel/Epic in the category Best American Edition of Foreign Material. 1989. Hackster Award, Salon International del Cómic del Principado de Asturias, Spain, for the Incal in the category Best Drawings. 1990. Solal d'Or of the Festival Bede de Salisville for Alter, Le Secret d'Aurélie, in the category Best Children's Comic Album, shared with Mark Batty. 1991. Eisner Award for Concrete in the category Best Single Issue. 1991. Harvey Award for Lieutenant Blueberry by Marvel/Epic in the category Best American Edition of Foreign Material. 1991. Hackster Award, Salon International del Cómic del Principado de Asturias, for La Diosa the Goddess in the category Best Drawings. 1996. Solal d'Or of the Festival Bede de Salisville for Blueberry, Mr. Blueberry, in the category Best Comic Album. 1997. Designated finalist for induction into the Harvey Award Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1989, inducted in 1997. 1997. World Fantasy Award in the category Best Artist. 1998. Induction into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame. 2000. Max and Moritz Prizes, Special Prize for Outstanding Life's Work. 2000. Sproing Award for Blueberry, Geronimo in the category Best Translated Strips. 2001. Spectrum Grandmaster. 2001. Hackster Award, Salon International del Cómic del Principado de Asturias, for The Crowned Heart in the category Best Long Comic Strip. 2003. Hackster Award, Salon International del Cómic del Principado de Asturias in the category Author That We Love. 2004. Albert Uderzo Award as Mœbius in the category Lifetime Achievement. 2009. Lauriers Verts de la Fort des Livres Prix Bede for Le Chasseur de Prime. 2011. Induction into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. 2011. Dubbed Chevalier de l'Ordre National du Mérite for his contributions to French culture, French civilian knighthood. 2012. The Castro site on the grounds of the Site Internationale de la bande dessinée et de l'image, France's National Comics Museum, is rechristened Le Vaisseau Mœbius English, the ship Mœbius, on 11 December in honor of the deceased artist. 2018. Asteroid 109435 Giraud was named in his memory. The official naming citation was published by the Minor Planet Center on 25 September 2018, MPC 191. 2020 Society of Illustrators Hall of Fame. Filmography. Note: listed are only the feature-length movie productions: Alien 1979, The Time Masters 1982, Tron 1982, Masters of the Universe 1987, Willow 1988, The Abyss 1989, Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland 1989, The Fifth Element 1997. The production design for the film was developed by Giraud, his daughter Helene, Jean-Claude Mézières, et al. Blueberry 2004. On the DVD extras, Giraud talks about the comic, the film, etc., dressed in period costume. Through the Mœbius strip 2005. Strange Frame 2012. Video games. Fade to Black cover art 1995. Panzer Dragoon 1995. Pilgrim, Faith as a Weapon concept art 1998. An arcade and bar based on Giraud's work, called the Airtight Garage, was one of the original main attractions at the Meter Inn in San Francisco when the complex opened in 1999. It included 3 original games: Quaternia, a first-person shooter networked between terminals and based on the concept of junctures from Major Fatal, and the Airtight Garage, a virtual reality bumper cars game about mining asteroids, and Hyperbole, an obstacle course bowling game incorporating very little overtly Mœbius imagery. The arcade was closed and reopened as Portal 1, retaining much of the Mœbius-based decor and Hyperbole, but eliminating the other originals in favor of more common arcade games. Jet Set Radio Future inspired the artwork and graphics of the game 2002. 7 Samurai 20 Roman 20 Character Design 2004. Gravity Rush inspired the artwork and graphics of the game. Sable video game is heavily inspired by Mœbius artwork 2021. Documentaries. 1987. The Masters of Comic Book Art documentary by Ken Viola 60 Min. 1994. La Constellation Jodorowsky documentary by Louis Mouchet, Giraud, and Alejandro Jodorowsky on the in-calendar and their abandoned film adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune. During the psychogenealogical session that concludes the film, Giraud impersonates Mouchet's father 88 Min and 52 Min. French second tape release in 1997, acclaim 691,953,670. British acclaim 805,082,536. French acclaim 883,137,959. Italian acclaim 875,154,036. and Spanish acclaim 804,213,000. 1994. Blueberry documentary by Christophe Haley Sendrain's Films for Canal Plus/TVCF, October, 27 Min. 1997. Jean Giraud's documentary by Hervé Parvier Stardom, Paris, 22 Min. 22 Min. 2 Min. 2 Min. Omen. Benimben. Documentary produced on the occasion of the September 1996 Blueberry Exposition at Stardom Gallery. The documentary title is a play on the title of the Blueberries art book, slated for release at the time. French second tape release in 1997, included as bonus for the boxed, limited edition of the art book Blueberries ISBN 2,908,706,024. 2000 Mr. Gurr and Mike S. Blueberry documentary by Damien Pettigrew. Giraud executes numerous sketches and watercolors for the Blueberry album. Geronimo Elapish travels to St. Malo for the celebrated comic book festival, visits his Paris editor Dargaud, and in the film's last sequence, does a spontaneous life-size portrait in real time of Geronimo on a large sheet of glass. Musée de la bande dessinée d'Angle. French second tape release in 2000 acclaim 812,528,584. 2002 Fellini, I'm a Born Liar documentary by Damien Pettigrew. Giraud conceived the poster for the documentary's 2003 North American release, reused as the cover for the American, Italian, and French DVD releases, and appears in the DVD bonus extras of the French version. 2005, the Visual Elements special feature with Giraud and his friend and co-worker Jean-Claude Mézières discussing their production design work on the movie The Fifth Element, The Fifth Element Ultimate Edition 2005 DVD, The Fifth Element 2015 4K Blu-ray, 18 Min. 2007, Mœbius Redux, A Life in Pictures biographical documentary by Hasko Baumann, Germany, England, Finland, Art BBC, ZDF, Il Avro, 68 Min. Non-commercial but licensed. Australian one-disc DVD release in 2008 acclaim 951,506. German two-disc DVD release in 2010, extended to 190 Min. Auclock 891,515,384. 2007. Jean Van Ham, William Vance at Jean Giraud, Il Abbé de Elapau Institutional Documentary FGBL Audiovisual, 70 min. 2010 Mœbius autobiographical portrait co-written by Jean Giraud and directed by Damien Pettigrew for the 2010 retrospective held at the Fondation Cartier for Contemporary Art in Paris. Fondation Cartier. French one-disc DVD release in 2011. Auclock 887,535,650, augmented with Pettigrew's 2000 Mr. Gurr and Mike S. Blueberry documentary.